Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My friend Danny Shin, Chair of the World Coffee Leaders, Mr. Hong, that last year also welcomed me here in Seoul, my friend Andrea Illy, Chairman of Illy Café, and Chairman of the Market and Promotion Development Committee of the ICO. My friend Rick Reinhardt, President of the Specialty Coffee Association of America and Chairman of the Private Sector Consultative Body of the ICO. As you all know, we all know, the ICO is well represented here in this meeting, and it's a pleasure for us to be participating in the World Coffee Leaders 2014. The global coffee sector faces today a rather paradoxical dilemma. Whilst on one hand we have good prospects of continuous increases in demand, notably in emerging markets, but also in more traditional ones, production has suffered from underinvestment, poor production, and adverse climatic conditions. As a result, the coffee supply chain remains a highly vulnerable one, prone to extreme volatility and in need of effective leadership if we are to ensure its long-term sustainability. We talk here of the three pillars of sustainability: the economic, the social, and the environmental. We have over 25 million farmers in the producing countries. More than 10% of the exports for several of the least developed countries come from coffee. And the global industry is worth $173 billion, while the global trade of coffee, green coffee, is $19 billion. In terms of the social impacts of sustainability, 95% of the coffee production is in developing countries. 70% of the production comes from smallholders' farms. And 50% of the workforce are women. Environmental. We have the sequestration of carbon. That's something that Illy Café worked very much and has studies very profound and serious about the matter. There is the small footprint on 11 million hectares, 0.2% of the agricultural lands, and coffee is the leader in sustainable crop production. I would like to refer to each one of these three critical areas, provide an overview of global consumption prospects, and finally look at ways that we can address those challenges. Without a doubt, climate change has emerged as one of the most severe threats currently facing the coffee industry. Coffee needs relatively specific conditions in order to thrive: a certain temperature, altitude, rainfall, which is why the best coffees grow only in certain countries, at certain altitudes, under certain conditions. A rising global temperature and changing climate threatens the availability of these conditions. We can see here in this slide the question of the temperature change observed in coffee regions. And the source is the International Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations. It's not, however, just a question of degradation in quality, but that of sudden outbreaks of pests and diseases with its consequent severe implications on the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of small and medium-sized coffee farmers. It's well known the effect that the coffee leaf rust had in Colombia because of the heavy rainfall occurred during 2007 and 2010. It took all these years for the Colombians to recover their crop. We are now seeing a relatively modest crop in Colombia compared to the size of that they had 7 years ago. We had also in Central America, it's well known that coffee farmers in Central America have seen their crops devastated by the outbreak of coffee leaf rust, affecting over 50% of the farms, damaging 20% of the production, and costing them over $500 million in lost revenue alone. I personally visited all the countries affected last year and could see the devastating effects of the coffee leaf rust in their production. This is going to have particular implications for the specialty coffee industry, as Rick Reinhardt will be addressing about later today. These adverse climatic events occurring in the past 7 or 8 years have only intensified the difficulties that underfinanced coffee farmers have experiencing for a long time. The truth is, millions of these farmers lack sufficient credit. This is partially due to the many challenges and non-negligible costs that formal lending institutions face when serving rural and sometimes far apart markets, and partially because of the inability of the coffee farmers and other coffee supply chain actors to manage risk. The continuous presence of these risks reduces, in turn, the incentives and willingness of financiers to lend to the sector, as well as curbing the interest of the coffee sector actors in borrowing to invest in their enterprises. To make things worse, it is often the case that the farmers have a poor understanding of the risks they face, thus thwarting their efforts to mitigate them and preventing the adequate assessment by pricing by lenders. We created at the International Coffee Organization the Consultative Forum on Coffee Finance, and we have working together with small farmers associations to try to overcome the vulnerability of coffee farmers to access to financing risk. Because in the two graphs we can see that the perceived funding risks is absolutely opposite to access to funds from each part of the global chain. There is significantly more value, profit, and income as one moves along the supply chain. As such, those actors are better placed to meet the lending criteria of banks and access finance. According, the origin end of the supply chain faces the greatest shortage of financing, as it generates the lowest value. In addition, those farther up the supply chain are usually much more able to effectively manage their risks. So, overall, our major concern when assessing the main issues affecting the sustainability of the coffee sector has to do with the vulnerability of our coffee farmers in many coffee-producing regions. Take, for instance, the rise in production costs over time, which can severely affect a producer's ability to make a sustainable living from their coffee crop. The main components of production costs for coffee producers are labor, fertilizers, and phytosanitary products. Labor costs are one of the major limiting factors for the development of coffee production. In many countries, one of the explanatory reasons for declining production levels is the aging agricultural population and the lack of youthful workers to replace it, due to largely to urban migration from rural areas. Coffee is a labor-intensive crop with little mechanization in many producing countries, and global urban wages are increasing widely. It is also widely recognized in social terms. Coffee plays an important role in the settlement of the farming population and the creation of employment in rural areas. Coffee also permits wider distributions of income among farming families. When prices are lower than production costs, opportunities for the rural population to renew itself are diminishing, given the lack of interest in farming among young people and the exodus to urban centers and developed countries. This situation threatens the stability and the sustainability of the economy in countries heavily dependent on coffee for the bulk of the export earnings. Finally, as it is the case of many commodities, I would like to point out that price volatility is a major concern for stakeholders in the world coffee market. In exporting countries, volatility is a source of uncertainty in relation to export earnings and tax revenues, as well as instability in producer incomes. In the importing countries, on the other hand, price volatility makes it difficult for roasters to control processing costs and affects profit margins. For traders and stockholders, making their activities less attractive. This year has been characterized by higher than average volatility in coffee prices. This is an inherent characteristic of the coffee market. Indeed, in the last 10 years, the global coffee price, ICO composite indicator, has nearly quintupled, then halved, then doubled again. This hurts everyone, but is particularly damaging for coffee farmers. Dear friends, I have pointed to you some of the key challenges we face in our industry, challenges that are matched by the fact that the world coffee consumption is thriving. This is very good news. World coffee consumption in 2013 was 145.8 million bags, and it's growing consistently at around 2.5% a year. The Economist Intelligence Unit released a document last week averaging this growth at 2.7%, which is even better. Furthermore, over the last 50 years, the perception of coffee as a healthy product has changed significantly, with a corresponding increase in the amount of scientific research into the positive health properties of coffee. Mr. André Aile is going to touch upon this issue with much greater interest. Exporting countries whose economic prospects are favorable to increase coffee consumption include Brazil, Indonesia, India, and Mexico. Living standards in some coffee exporting countries continue to improve, creating a strong potential for growth in domestic coffee consumption, given an expanding middle class. If we look ahead to 2020, we are expecting a total consumption of 175 million bags, 30 million bags more than last year. Emerging markets are found in newly industrialized countries which have experienced considerable economic and social development, like is the case here in South Korea. As a group, these emerging markets have recorded considerable growth in coffee consumption, with an increase from 10.2 million bags in 1990 to 27.9 million bags in 2012, representing an average annual growth rate of 4.7%. So, although some traditional markets are growing only modestly, with consumption appearing to have reached saturation point in many countries, there still exist several dynamic niche opportunities for producers to benefit from, such as specialty and certified coffees. Given the context of a free market that we operate, we can not only address the issues of climate change, risk, access to finance, and extreme volatility through increased learning, setting up as a vital goal the conversion of our small coffee farmers in small entrepreneurs. To this effect, and as a decisive step in that direction, the International Coffee Organization and the World Bank, the Agricultural Risk Management Team of the World Bank, have developed a joint study to identify risks at different stages of the coffee value chain, to determine their impact on the availability and the cost of finance, and to propose feasible remedial measures that could mitigate these risks. Parallel to this report, we are also finalizing the up-to-date assessment of coffee and climate change, one where we not only describe the current state of the art, but also mean to provide member countries with the necessary roadmap to access adaptation and mitigation funds, leading to the Paris 2015 Climate Change Summit. Ultimately, success in achieving a sustainable coffee sector, one that will guarantee the availability of coffee in the quantities and qualities that are required, now and in the future. Ultimately, that success will be measured by the increased involvement of young people in coffee farmers as small entrepreneurs. This will be no easy task, and perhaps can only be accomplished if we promote synergies across all actors of the coffee supply chain when addressing critical issues of the sector. In these regards, the ICO is pushing for a shared vision that can foster a structured collaboration among the supply chain, among companies, donors, NGOs, governments, and research to address sustainability for the benefit of coffee farming communities. We believe the future means building a collaborative, multi-stakeholder effort in coffee, a groundbreaking opportunity for a structured public-private collaboration. Anchored in the belief that the coffee sector can pioneer new way of working together for a better future for coffee farming, I would like to highlight three key opportunities along the following lines. First, putting in place a truly innovative and participatory model for effective partnership and collaboration between government and coffee-producing countries, the private sector, the civil society, aiming at farmers' benefits and solutions to systemic sustainability issues through joint agenda identification. Second, obtaining more and better aligned funds and investments for coffee by donors, funders, banks, investors, guided by the national developed and defined coffee strategies between public and private coffee stakeholders. And third, promoting an aligned vision and contribution to sustainable coffee farming from supply chain interventions driven by the mutual collaboration between public and private sector in coffee. I hope I have achieved in offering a brief overview of the main challenges and opportunities in the global coffee industry, convinced that that no task is too big or too difficult if we join forces in large-scale cross-sector coordination. I would like also to bring to your attention as Mr. Andrea Illy is going to do in a few minutes, that we are going to hold a global coffee forum at the ages of the Expo 2015 in Milano to celebrate the first International Coffee Day in October 1st next year. And I count with the presence of all of you. Thank you very much.